My name is Robert Thomas, and I am the Executive Director of the Baltimore Public Markets and Lexington Market, Inc.
Okay, thank you. Now these are not in any particular order, but
Okay.
The marketplace at Fellows Point project at one point was going to rebuild this market.
Yeah.
Can you tell us from your knowledge how those plans fell apart?
The Marketplace project actually included the North Shed and some alterations to the South Shed and an additional pavilion south of the South Shed, I believe. And all of that was put on hold when it was publicly revealed that the red line would be coming through on, what is Alisana, right? Coming through on Alisana, which would also mean that the construction crews for MTA or whoever was subcontracted to do the work would actually be staging their equipment in this very lot that we're standing in, and that could go on for up to 3 years. So the developer could see, they were already working on how to make the numbers come together, but that delay and with no real terminus was an unfortunate piece of news. So they really couldn't pull together a plan that said we have a way of getting around that. Since they couldn't get around it, they came back to the board. So the board was waiting, had really essentially been waiting patiently for one or more of these developers to pull something together. And when the developer at that point said, we need another 3 years, that proved to be something that the board had no appetite for. So they said, we're going to just end the master development agreement and the possibilities for anything, and then if we go back out again, it'll be a public offering. But the red line really essentially was the initiative that was the first domino in that whole piece. So that's when it ended. That phase of it ended, which was the cooperation and collaboration of a total of 4 different developers. So that phase ended, and then we put it out to RFP.
Okay. And tell me the city's relationship with the markets.
City owns all the property. The city owns the buildings, and separately the city owns the lots. The lots are not a part of the leasehold for the Baltimore Public Markets Corporation, but the city does own the lots and is operated by the Parking Authority of Baltimore City. So from one end to the other, it's city-owned property. Now, the Baltimore Public Markets Corporation does have a lease with the city to manage these properties. And that lease goes back to 1995. It includes other market properties, Avenue Market, Hollins Market, Northeast, what am I missing? Cross Street, and of course Broadway. So all 5 are still part of the lease between Baltimore Markets Corporation and the city.
So are you a public agency, or are you?
No, we're actually a 501c3 nonprofit that is set up specifically by the lease to manage the markets and take the burden of running the markets off of the city. Because that became part of the issue, both with BPMC and with Lexington, which is its own separate 501c3. But the burden of running the markets just was more than the city could, it was beyond the city's capacity to pay that much attention to it. And so that's why that was developed.
So when it comes to bigger scale changes, who makes the decisions? Do you share the decisions? Do you recommend and the city decides, or how does that work?
Yes.
I'm getting into
yes, and the fourth one, yes. So the board knows what the condition is of all the markets, and so if there are changes to come or there are things that haven't been raised at a board meeting, I will raise them, or my staff will inform me, and we'll raise them and we'll elevate them to the board level. There are city representatives on the board by bylaws. So by informing the board, we're also informing the city through these city representatives. So decision making for large projects and for redevelopment such as we're talking about now is shared. We will recommend some things and elevate them to the board, but between the city's representatives, the board of directors, either some outside consultant input if necessary, that's where the decisions are made. There is a sort of a hierarchy. Some things are recommended. So for instance, a project manager, a private consultant would recommend, but the actual implementation would come to management, and then the board would essentially make the final decision, or the board and management will make the final decision.
Okay, so one of the questions that I had down here was, what's the process used to manage changes? And I guess you described what the process might be generally in
There's
recent
more.
history.
Yeah, there's
But
more.
Going back before you started,
Yeah, if it was prior to Baltimore Public Markets Corporation forming, which would be pre-1995, then it was all city agency, and that meant that whoever was involved at the city level in making those decisions would be the ones making those decisions, but it was all city, and whoever the administrators were or the council people were, somebody made that decision within the city's ranks.
okay.
What has happened, though, I just want to add this one note, but what has happened is that we are using a number of different methods to manage changes in the market, and most of the changes right now are about redevelopment. And that means that we are engaging consultants and project managers / fee developers, people who essentially do this all day, so that we don't miss a step, whereas our strength would be and focus would be on managing day to day and things that help us manage farther out. Redevelopment is a different animal, and we are we're managing that change by engaging entities and people and companies and teams that have a broader range of exposure and have been at other public markets and know the inner workings or other developments. And just the process of real estate development itself is something that we want to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So it is a collaboration to deal with these new changes, because these changes are things that, for the most part, in my history of the markets, haven't really happened at this level and at this scale. We have 3 markets plus Lexington that are under some form of redevelopment or about to be at the cusp of it. So this is different. This is new territory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of our questions, was recent changes in the overall market system and
Yeah.
Broadway in particular.
Yeah, the recent changes are really more about, in all of the markets, in the market system, the recent changes are about getting the markets positioned for the future and to serve the clientele, the market base of whether it's a neighborhood or tourists or whatever, better. Because we haven't been as nimble as one would need to be, because the customer landscape has changed. So we have 2 sets of customers. This is one piece of change. We have 2 sets of customers. One is the one that pays our bills, and those are the tenants, the merchants. That's changed. That is changing. I'll get back to why. And then we also have the second level, well, I shouldn't say, another level of customer, and that's the retail customer. They've changed, therefore the retailers have changed, and we have to be nimble enough to adapt to that. We're engaging people who do retail leasing and others who understand some of these changes to help us with it, so that we can manage properly, but also so that we can re-tenant properly. And we see some gaps also in the way we have some of our other markets, not so much Broadway, but some gaps in how we have offerings and our tenant base. I mean, we'd like to have people who are making things, maker space, producers. This market is sort of small in the sense that finding and establishing maker space may be a change that we won't be able to as fully engage as we'd like, but it is something that's it's part of the landscape now. People are looking for those who work with the food, who create stuff.
So this is makers of food.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, primarily.
Okay.
Yeah, we're counting on that part primarily. But those who work with the food, I mean, just demonstration is part of the theater of public markets. So yeah, if there's a meat monger who actually is making sausage, for those who kind of who can handle watching sausage being made, it's part of the theater. It's part of what should happen.
So I didn't have it specifically, but you're kind of leading into something.
Okay.
What is the future of market? How are markets changing, just globally? Because
Globally.
it seems like you're trying to stay in touch with it and lead the way with Baltimore's markets.
Well, globally, people are coming back from places like Barcelona and wherever else, and saying, gee, the markets over there are this, and they're doing that, and they're vibrant, and they're alive. And it really is sort of a back to the future sort of scenario where we had makers in the market before. We had local connection in the market before. We had people who knew you, and they know what your preferences were, how you wanted the meat sliced, or which kinds of greens that you normally cooked with. That is, the local piece is essential going forward. The producer-maker connection to the farm, whether it's urban farm or rural farm, is something that we really want to get back to in the market system. And we're finding that some of the markets are more conducive to that than others. So if we work the markets as a system, what happens in one can help compensate for a lack in another. If there's not enough space to do something in one, we can do it in another one that's closer, like Northeast or something, and ship it down here. There are lots of ways to skin that cat. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The current status of the Broadway markets.
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked a little bit about the RFP.
Yeah.
And I guess the RFP was, how was the decision made to come out with the RFP, the details of the RFP, and then not to go with the respondent to that RFP,
Yeah.
and what's the status
next?
now and what might happen?
What's next? Well, that was an interesting story. When we pick up from where the board left off, they said the next time we go for redevelopment of this market, we want it to be a public offering. And so we stuck to that. It took a few months before we got to the point where the decision was made to actually make it a public offering through an RFP. But when we did, the RFP essentially was configured to give enough room to a developer to create something different and unique, to reactivate the North Market space, and to treat or recommend the treatment for these surface lots, whether it's occupying them with another building or just landscaping, streetscaping. With all of the RFPs, we're cognizant of the fact that it's city-owned property. And so the city and the Market Corporation have this joint asset that we need to recapture the value for. And that was really the intent of the RFP. Now, the respondent came out with a plan that seemed to raise a lot of hackles.
But in all fairness, everything raises hackles in Fells Point.
We thought we'd be nice and not acknowledge that. We figured, this doesn't seem to be making anybody happy. But the other part of it was that it didn't capture the value of the asset and return any value to the city at all. The proposal did not. It essentially was, the terms were not viewed favorably by the city's representatives on the board. And so for that, after a little bit of back and forth to see if there was any movement either way, the city decided we can probably do this better without this proposal. And it'll be less drama, for sure. I'm not so sure, but maybe. But in any case, it has to be treated as an asset. We need to value the assets, and we need to increase the value of the assets. And that really wasn't happening both in the short term or the long term. I know there are developments around town that promise a return to the city in 30 years and that sort of thing, but that isn't what we were going for. We were looking for something that would activate the space now and keep the character of the public market somewhere in there, even if it's just the building. And the plan that was submitted didn't really do much for that, even though it activated the space from Alisana all the way to Lancaster. Lancaster. It just wasn't viewed receptively by the board. So that was another one down, and it was decided perhaps the city and the Market Corporation just should take this on, get a fee developer to assist us, get an architect, go through those kinds of plans. So that's what we're in the midst of doing now. We're looking for an architect, someone in the area who's familiar with Fells Point, which would be helpful. working with, we're about to set up an arrangement with a fee developer who would be a project manager, but somebody who does development all day, and can figure out which hurdles that we can circumvent, we can get over, how to get through those things, so that we actually get to the goal of activating the north shed, preserving and even improving the south shed. And if there's more to be added in the space below it with the surface lots or this lot, then that too. But that's all part of the architectural design. So that's what's next. It is the time frame for that is clearly given that we're in November. Time frame for all of this actually gaining momentum is clearly into the first quarter of 2018. But we're excited about it. We're excited, but it's a thorny issue just because we want to make sure that it's potentially thorny, maybe not. I may be jaded, I don't know.
You've been down here too much?
Yeah. I mean, I think we all want to get it right. We all want to get it right. And the lease, one interesting thing I should mention, the lease that the corporation has with the city calls for the public markets to, it's several things, but one thing is to to facilitate commercial revitalization in the neighborhoods where they are. That's a piece that is, we're taking that seriously. We don't know what that's going to look like when it grows up, but that is in the lease. That's something that we have an obligation to do. So if it means that we're a catalyst for other development, or we are in concert with other development around us, so be it. But one way or the other, we want to serve the retail customer base. We want to be consistent and compatible with the merchants around us, the other businesses around us. But we also want to spur some kind of commercial revitalization or commercial generation so that the area is healthy. And that's the city's viewpoint, and that's why they crafted that into the lease. So that's kind of what's next.
Is that globally in all the projects the markets that you manage, or is that specific to this?
No, that's definitely the case globally for all the public markets. They've added one other thing for Lexington, which actually could probably end up being the case down here, which is create a destination. So at this point, with the Pendry across the street and a few other things that are happening in this neighborhood, destination wouldn't be bad. And we don't know how that's going to work out. Yeah, I'm going to stick to the basics. So we'll work on getting the basic market piece done, and if it ends up being some kind of a destination, great. Yeah.
One thing I've been really impressed by in the meetings that I've filmed and heard, things that I've heard, is that Baltimore really does seem to value its public markets.
Yeah. I'm hoping so, because this is really the only city aside from New York that has multiple public markets. New York has a couple, and we have 6. And I don't know, I haven't visited another city in all of the 50 states that we've been to that has more than one public market. It's difficult to do it, and especially if it's a municipality that initiates it. It is just difficult to do it. So you'll find one, and the city will have to come back. Most of the markets that I've been to have a story of revitalization, of being up and declining, and then revitalized because a bunch of stakeholders or entities said, this is of value, so we ought to bring it back up. It's a recurring theme with public markets. It doesn't have to be the case with private markets, but public markets, I think that is true.
The Fells Point community could actually decide what it wanted.
Yeah.
As a single entity.
Yeah.
How could we influence what happens, or is that out of our control?
I don't think it's totally out of your control. I don't really know how that works. Because I actually don't know I don't know the track record of what Fells Point has managed to influence before, but I'm thinking that the communication we have with the Fells Point Task Force and the community organizations and some of those entities like that, and then the stakeholders around us, are the voices that we're hearing. And so we're trying to aggregate all of that into something that actually works, recognizing that it's still a city asset, and for all we know, the final decision may come out of City Hall. But City Hall has indicated that they want to listen, and that we should be listening, and that's what we're trying to do. I suspect that conversation, just getting the narrative right and clearly heard, is a large part of some degree of influence. And we certainly want to hear the merchants. We're scheduled to talk with the merchants some more and give them an update this coming week. But I do that whenever I'm down this way anyway. The issue is you guys have stuck it out, and you've been here since before the 2007, 8, 9 debacle financially. And so what works for you? What's going to help you continue to do business and keep the following that you've got? So there's several constituencies, and we're just really trying to figure out, we're trying to thread that needle, which is pretty interesting. But I mean, I think we can be smart enough to do that. I am resolute in just being smart, just figuring it out. I mean, that's just part of my background, it's part of my education. It's like, get it done, figure it out.
Well, you're part of your mission to help the businesses nearby. I think we interviewed Dave Holmes yesterday.
Yeah. Oh, good.
And he was talking about this project and how he felt like it had gone.
Yeah.
He's not totally out of it, but
right.
he said that the rental side of it, the residential had done really, really well,
Yes.
but the storefronts are still suffering, and he thinks it's probably because the market is still.
That's one way we can help the. That's one way we can help the Fells Point community. I mean, to rescue the property from dilapidation and from deterioration is a way that I believe that we can help the Fells Point community, in the sense that it shouldn't be here in that condition. These markets should be alive and well, and so that's the goal, is to make them alive and well, and not a detraction, but an addition to the vibrancy and the life of this area. That's what we're aiming for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you probably have answered it, but one of my questions was, why is it important to Fells Point community?
Yeah.
And I think you've already answered that.
That's where I was going with that, and that's really kind of what I was thinking through, because that's at the base level why it's important to the Fells Point community, because who wants to have a dilapidated structure or two, or even a declining and deteriorating one? We have to take the long view. Sure, we have to get things going sooner rather than later, but we also have to take the long view, because if we've gone 30 years without responding to any of the changes in the retail landscape, that's a long time. And retail doesn't work in that cycle. Retail works in much shorter cycles. And so not only do we have to get it right for now, but we have to start thinking about what's our position for these properties in 10 years. I don't think that's too far-fetched. We just have to figure out how to position them with some flexibility, so that when the trend changes, we can adapt. Which we haven't been able to do that. That hasn't happened over 3 decades at the very least, in all of the markets. And that's why I have 4 at one time that are in need of redevelopment.
Yeah, I was just looking at a meeting that I filmed, I think it was like 2007 maybe, where Cross Street Market was going great, Lexington Market was going great.
Yeah.
And it is a short cycle. It's amazingly short.
It's a short cycle. Retail in 10 years changes. Retail in 5 years changes. I don't even know what's happening in retail right now, just this year, with the places that are closing, trends that are happening. So we have to adapt to that. We have to get rid. I mean, if it's a struggle to make money at Pratt and Light, what are the rest of us doing if we're not adapting? We need to get that part figured out, and we need to figure out for the short term, for the intermediate term, and for the long term. And I think that's what we're really trying to do. We're just trying to make sure that, assuming there are just incremental changes in the area, we're able to be flexible enough to adapt, or we have something that is enough of an anchor to make sense that gives life to the rest of the neighbors in our community. So we want to be a good neighbor. We don't want to be a poor corporate neighbor.
Is there anything else you'd like to say that I didn't ask?
I think you covered it pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that as I thought about it more, I'm like, these are great questions. It's what I don't want to talk all day because I could. But
Well, I
yeah,
really
it's
want
great.
you to know we appreciate you making yourself available, and
Thank you.
I'm happy at what you said about moving forward with the markets
Thank you.
and the direction you're going. So I appreciate it. Thank
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure.
And you sound
Thank
good
you.
at work.
These tenants have been amazingly resilient. They've just hung in there through some really tough times. And so we want to make sure that they're accommodated one way or another in this area because this is where their following is. But we also know that we have to buffer our tenant base to something that is what people want in the area. So there's what people need, and then there's what people want, and we're just trying to thread that needle too. So there are those constituencies. I mean, it's, Long and Foster wants to walk over across the street for lunch. I should have lunch for them somewhere in here. If they want 6 different kinds of coffee, mocha something, latte something, I should be able to offer that. So just double calf, decaf, no calf. I should be able to offer that. Because as far as I can tell, based on the research we've had, there are a number of millennials in the area, and coffee is the number 1 beverage. So why aren't we keeping up with that? That's a question for me. And I asked the merchants that. I asked people at the other markets that, and they're like, no. There's really no reason. We should be keeping up. We're in retail. We got to do that. Yeah. For some of these people, it's a life. It's their livelihood. I get that. I'm not asking people to change, but I really like the vendors in the South Shed. I realized we shuttled them down there so that they could kind of survive. But they're pretty cool. I get along with Vicky all the time. Sophia's so quiet, But I love her, Chris Chicky, all the time. And Sal, I see him when I see him. But otherwise, I just come over here and get some seafood. It's like, man, I show up at home. It's like, look what I got. It's great.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.